Back again live with Larry Klayman. Hello, Larry.
Jason,
lovely to see
great
you
to
again.
see you again.
Likewise. So, Larry, it's a big day. You've filed a complaint requesting declaratory judgment and injunctive relief in the Bundy case.
It's actually a new case,
Oh,
and
a
it's
new
for
case.
Klayman Bundy, and we filed it in state court in Las Vegas, Nevada, Clark County. And what we're saying is the land belongs to the people of Nevada and the citizens of Clark County, not to the federal government. And Klayman's been saying this all along. This was his so-called 15-second defense, is that the feds never had jurisdiction to come in on his ranch. They would have been trespassing because the state owns the land, and Judge Navarro, in fact, had no jurisdiction to even entertain a criminal prosecution because of that. Mm-hmm. And in my 25-plus visits with Klayman over the last 2 years, this is something he always wanted me to do, but we held off for doing it until after the prosecution. And what we're hopeful is that a state court judge, and a state court judge would be hard-pressed to say the land does not belong to the people of Nevada and Clark County, would issue a declaratory judgment, and therefore the state would be required to protect the Bundy Ranch and other ranchers if the BLM comes back with another paramilitary raid.
Right.
So it's kind of an insurance policy. This case will probably go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court in the end. And a very strong legal argument can be made, Jason, that the federal government never owned this land. They claim 85% ownership of land in Nevada.
Wow.
High percentage in Utah, in Arizona. It's a real issue throughout the West. President Obama nationalized Klayman's ranch on his way out the door, and large parts of Utah. President Trump, who was very supportive of the ranchers in the West when he ran for president, and also Klayman Bundy and his family, he should be on our side here. And
But how can they just nationalize the land? What does that mean? They turned it into a park or something?
they turned it into a national monument. And in Klayman's case, the Gold Butte National Monument. In other states, the Escalante National Monument. They've also used that as an excuse not to allow oil drilling throughout the United States. Radical, rabid environmentalists control the Democratic Party. They get their votes from them. And radical Indian tribes as well. I'm not against the Indians, but there are some Looney Tunes Indian tribes out there.
Native Americans, of course.
Native Americans, okay. Not the Washington Redskins.
Right.
But I spent years in Washington, so I know that issue. But this is to eliminate any possibility that the BLM after Trump will come back before we get a court ruling, and they should never come back, frankly, and do what they did before, because that's an outrage.
I agree. Now, so is this eminent domain? How is the government able to nationalize their land? They own the land, or this is something I think a lot of people have a difficult time understanding. They don't own it, they have a claim to it. So they maintain it, and they have the rights to utilize it for cattle grazing.
Well, they actually claim that they own it. These are so-called public lands, okay? But
the government claims they own it.
The federal government claims it, and you can read the complaint, which will get up on your website and at freedomwatchusa.org. I'll send a press release out tomorrow because you're getting it hot off the press. We just filed this just a few minutes ago. But the way the land succeeded from Mexico to the United States only held the land in trust for the states when they became states. It never really owned the land. And you got to ask yourself a simple question. How is it that the state of Nevada is a state when the federal government claims to own nearly all of its land? And that's why this issue needs to be resolved by a state court. Klayman previously went into federal court on his own, pro se, as we say.
Right.
And of course, a federal judge ruled one way. But now we're asking a state court to make a ruling. And the situation has changed given what Obama has done, because he took the land away from the people of Nevada and Clark County and declared it a national monument, a spiteful act. And behind him, of course, was the evil senator, ex-senator Harry Reid, who was the senator from Nevada, was at least, but he's still like the Wizard of Oz. He's the force behind the scenes.
Right.
And there's a long story about that.
Well, now let me make sure I understand this. So Klayman Bundy went to federal court prior to his incarceration, and in representing himself pro se, without an attorney, said this land in question, it's owned by the Bundy family, and the federal court said, no, get out of here, it's owned by the government.
That's right. We would expect a federal judge to do that. He's scratching the back of his benefactors.
Right.
But now we have a new situation, a new case or controversy where Obama nationalized the land. That brings it forward, and now we want the state court to make a ruling. And what I was saying, Jason, is a state court judge should be representing, at least giving a fair shake to legal arguments, which say that the people of Nevada and Clark County own that land. And that was Klayman's reason, one of the reasons that he didn't pay grazing fees, because the money was not owed to the federal government. If there was any money to be owed, it was to the state of Nevada and Clark County. And he would actually write checks to them, and they would return the checks.
Right. So he was trying to pay Clark County for the grazing.
That's correct.
And previously they had been paying Clark County. How did that whole discrepancy come
Well,
about?
they never paid Clark County. But here's what happened. Here's the other reason. Is that over the course of time, the Bureau of Land Management, which is a very neo-Nazi type organization, for lack of a better word, we've seen what they did with the Bundys, they decided that they were going to assert their control over the land. This is going back decades. They said, we're going to manage the land for the ranchers. You don't have to manage it, and we're going to charge you a fee for managing that land. And the way they manage the land with these crazy environmental regulations is they put endangered species like the desert tortoise ahead of the ranchers and their cattle. And in the case of Klayman, you know, he ranches on about 400,000 acres in and around Lake Mead. This is desert. It's very arid. There's not much for cattle to eat, so they have to roam, you know, roaming on the range. And consequently, the way the BLM was managing that land, they were literally telling the ranchers what bush the cattle could eat at. Because if you go into this sector, oh, you're going to hurt the desert tortoise. If you go into that sector, you're going to do some other environmental atrocity. And it was completely disingenuous. It was completely bogus, because the desert tortoise actually likes to be around cattle. It eats the cow manure. And plus there are rocks that they can go under, you know, if they want shade and shelter. So it was a completely manufactured argument, and it was manufactured by politicians like Harry Reid, who inserted into the Bureau of Land Management his chief of staff, Neil Corns, so they could then conduct this paramilitary raid, threaten the lives of the Bundys, beat up Klayman's family. They killed tens of bulls in the herd, which are used to procreate, to have a herd. And the whole idea was to drive Klayman out of business, so Harry Reid and his corrupt son in downtown Las Vegas, who's also a lawyer, could sell the land out from under the Bundys and most likely get kickbacks.
Right.
You know, this is a mafia town. That's what it is.
And it's also, everything you're describing is very reminiscent of what we see happening, you know, in the FBI in terms of before we're able to have these kind of conversations that go out over the internet. It's really hidden how these individual players get put into places like the FBI. You know, nobody knew who Andrew McCabe was. Nobody knew who these guys in the Bureau of Land Management were, but they get installed there by politicians who understand the system and who have influence over, let's say, the local media, to be able to get them to not talk about it and not make a national issue of it. But I think it's important that we do make a national issue of it.
Well, this guy, Neil Corns, was the yes man of Harry Reid.
Right.
And then, of course, Harry Reid got Corns in there because of his influence as majority leader at the time to have Obama appoint Neil Corns as head of the BLM. That's part of the Department of the Interior. You're exactly right, Jason. This is the way it's done. Your yes man is put in control of the FBI, the Justice Department, whatever.
And he's beholden to you.
They're servants. That's what they are. They're not civil servants. They're servants of corruption.
Corruption, and that's a big deal. Now, so Sheriff Lombardo was not the sheriff at the time that this all was happening, right? What was the guy's name? Gilbert?
Current Sheriff Lombardo, who's been covering up the Paddock Massacre here in Las Vegas. To this day, months later, no one has a clue what's going on. I have a theory on that. We can talk about it later. But Lombardo was deputy sheriff. The sheriff at the time was Doug Gillespie. Gillespie. And they were both out there at the Bundy Ranch. They both saw the potential for another Waco massacre, and they convinced the feds to leave. But then Lombardo came back later in an early Bundy-related trial because, you know, Judge Navarro broke up at the request of the prosecutors the trying of 19 defendants into 3 parts. And the first 2 trials, which had a mistrial and a retrial, Lombardo actually testified that he felt threatened by the protesters and the Bundys, and that was a total lie.
But that's interesting that you say that, because when I went to a police press conference there at Metro PD headquarters, I was standing with a cell phone camera. There was an armed police officer with a visible gun and 2 officers behind him. And when I asked him why I wouldn't be allowed into the press conference, he said, "Sir, I'm feeling threatened by you right now." And I found it very curious, because here are 3 guns, 3 cops, I'm in the police station, all I have is a video camera, and I'm standing at this distance from him. I felt like he was using those words to create a pretext for beating me up, handcuffing me, and arresting me.
Well, because they knew that you were there on behalf of Klayman Bundy to cover that event.
Well, that was for the Vegas shooting, but
oh, okay,
for them to say, "We feel threatened by you," I think then they could write a report that said I was being threatened by Mr. Goodman, and so I beat him up.
Well, we know that there was a risk assessment. That was one of the crucial pieces of evidence that was withheld by the FBI and the BLM in the Bundy trial that was just dismissed with prejudice, the indictment. And that threat assessment said the Bundys are peaceful people, they're devout Mormons, they're not a threat to anybody. And the Bundys never took up arms during that standoff. They tried to get them on a conspiracy charge with the other protesters, and those protesters, by and large, did not point guns in the direction of the federal agents. And to the extent that anybody did, it was only after the guns were pointed at them.
And didn't Klayman say that it was a protest against the sheriff's failure to protect their rights, the state's ownership of the land versus the feds?
In large part. Yeah, it was both. But Klayman's position has always been, and that's why we had a press conference right after the indictment was dismissed with prejudice. You covered it, Jason, and you did a great job doing that and getting that out for people to see. But that is exactly what Klayman's beef is. And he invited Sheriff Lombardo to the press conference. He says, "Look, if the feds come back again, if the BLM comes back again, I expect you to protect me because you're my sheriff. We voted for you, the people of Clark County. And you're a sheriff in the state of Nevada. You owe your allegiance to us, not to the federal government, who in fact doesn't own the land, number one, and number two, the way they did it was like a neo-Nazi SS operation. I mean, it was just unbelievable."
I can't remember if it was you or Klayman who said in a previous conversation that it was exactly what King George would do: come steal the land, beat people up, do whatever they want. It's just
well, that's right. You know,
outrageous.
there's an interesting thing here because people that don't know anything about this, mostly on the left, okay, because the left believes that the federal government should have total control of every aspect of our lives, including the land. They will say that Klayman was wrong in what he did, okay. Some of them will say he was wrong in what he did, but the BLM tried to take his cattle the wrong way, okay, to pay the grazing fees, to sell it off.
Killing the cattle.
Yeah, but you know what? Go back to the Revolution. Go back to the days before the Revolution. Our founding fathers violated every edict of King George III. King George was making the law. That law was illegitimate under the law of man, natural law. And they decided, we're going to break the law to enforce the law. Well, Klayman didn't break any laws. I'm just saying that sometimes unjust laws need to be challenged, and sometimes you need to stand up for your rights. And sometimes, if in this case the federal government is threatening to kill you and your family, you have a right of self-defense. Right. And even with all that, the Bundys never picked up an arm during the entire thing.
That's an important point that I'm glad you brought up. Why do so many people have this notion that the Bundys were in an armed conflict with the federal agents?
Because of the misinformation campaign of the fake news media. The fake news media was out there long before President Trump ran for the presidency and won. They've been out there.
Yeah.
Klayman Bundy is a threat to them. Klayman Bundy is someone who resists the force of the federal government. For the left, in its extreme and even in its moderate, and atheism, of course, is rampant on the left, government is your God. I mean, go back to the Soviet Union, China, religion was outlawed. Government is your God. So when you challenge government, that's sacrilegious for them. And Klayman is a threat to that. And that's why I gravitated to Klayman, because I've seen all these years, Jason, how federal judges, state judges, government officials routinely trash the rights of the American people under our Constitution. And I've gotten to the point, and I always do it peacefully, I never advocate violence, But I've gotten to the point of being so frustrated that when you see a righteous family like the Bundy family come along that stands up for its rights, that's willing to risk all, risk its life, its fortune, and its sacred honor, just like the founding fathers, you have to admire that. And you have to say, my God, this is a second American Revolution.
Yeah.
And that's what Klayman fought. Klayman fought a dishonest law and won.
And when you say fighting the law, of course, you're talking about through legal means such as your website, Freedom Watch, and I want to make sure we tell everybody that URL again and show them the site right here. You've got a petition on there right now. Why don't you tell people about what's going on freedomwatchusa.org?
Well, we know what's been going on with Robert Mueller. The man is not a man of integrity. The man is completely dishonest. He has hack prosecutors who are trying to destroy President Trump. And I felt, because Attorney General Sessions had his head in the sand, we now know why, Jason, because he's under investigation. He was just interviewed by Mueller last week for 4 hours for alleged Russian collusion and obstruction of justice and firing Comey, giving advice to President Trump to do it, that our Attorney General basically took an exit stage left. He did that with the Bundy case, too. I asked him to review it. He said he would. His statement was, I'm not taking sides. Now, he decided to review it after, allegedly decided to review it after Judge Navarro declared the mistrial before she dismissed it. But our Attorney General's been inert. Now, my former group does mostly Freedom of Information Act requests.
Judicial Watch.
Judicial Watch.
Yeah.
I do hard-hitting litigation. I am a former federal prosecutor. I do criminal defense work. I do other types of things. I'm a trial lawyer for 40 years. So I said to myself, who better to be appointed special counsel to investigate not just the Clinton scandals,
Yeah.
the email scandal, Fusion GPS, Uranium One, but also to investigate Mueller himself, okay, who is corrupt and is spending millions of taxpayer dollars conducting investigations outside of his authority. Who better than Larry Klayman? So I've asked the public to sign this petition, and if they will donate, because this is expensive, what we're doing. We have several lawsuits against Mueller already to have him disqualified as special counsel, but also to sign the petition to have me made special counsel to do all this investigation. And they can go to freedomwatchusa.org. You're showing the picture, freedomwatchusa.org. If you can, please donate to our cause. But even if you can't, just sign up, because we need a citizens' army. We need to keep you advised of what's going on. And we need your prayers.
How many signatures do you need to be appointed special counsel? Is it like 100,000?
Well, it's not like running for the Senate, which I did once in Florida. If you have a certain number of signatures, you don't have to pay the filing fee. But it's to basically convince the Department of Justice that Larry Klayman's the best man for the job. And frankly, Sessions should welcome my being appointed special counsel. It takes the monkey off his back.
Yeah. It seems like there's a lot of weird stuff going on. I'm getting a bit of interference, I apologize. A lot of weird stuff going on with that Mueller investigation. I wonder, sometimes they do things that don't seem to be in line with what the best interest of the investigation might be. Now, there was something interesting that I meant to ask you in our last discussion that slipped my mind. On December 21st, President Trump passed an executive order, if I'm speaking correctly, that allowed for the use of civil forfeiture of assets from individuals who are seen to be violating human rights, like human trafficking and things like this. Could that executive order be used against, let's say, the private prison corporation that locked up the Bundys? And does that open the door for some new kind of prosecution?
It seems that it may be, I haven't really studied that yet, Jason, but we know about civil forfeiture with tax matters, for instance, where the IRS during Obama just went in and seized all your assets without any showing that you had evaded paying taxes.
Right.
Okay? If they just had a whim that you were doing it, they would do it.
Right.
So it can be used positively, but it's also extremely dangerous to give the federal government that kind of power. And it's akin to what the intelligence agencies and the FBI have as surveillance powers. And you've got this guy as head of the CIA, Mike Pompeo, who A, is not the sharpest knife in the drawer. I mean, just watch him on TV and you'll see this guy's not exactly quick.
I think that's real here.
But he believes that the government should have unbridled surveillance over the American people, you know, under the guise of trying to catch terrorists. And we now know that not just with President Trump and the illegal wiretaps on him, you know, that were triggered with this phony dossier of Fusion GPS.
Yep.
But we also know that these sections, these intelligence statutes, the Freedom Act, USA Freedom Act, and Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act have been violated wholesale, even after I got 2 court orders telling them to stop by Judge Richard Leon. We have a new case, because you wouldn't believe the strange things that are happening to my cell phone and computer. And my client, Dennis Montgomery, who's an NSA, CIA, FBI whistleblower, who came forward to Comey at the FBI with 600 million pages of information, much of it classified. I got him immunity. He had taken it when he left those agencies, showing massive surveillance on the American people, surveillance of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, other justices, 156 judges, Trump when he was a businessman, and people like me who challenged the government. So all of this is covered up, and we live in an Orwellian state. The judge ruled that. And these kinds of powers are extremely dangerous when they get into the hands of people like Comey or Mueller or McCabe and all these people. You know, we live in a tyrannical system today.
Did you ever think you'd see a United States of America that looked like this?
Not as a kid, you know. I believed in the government. When I went to work for the Justice Department in 1979, this was the highest calling that I could do as a lawyer. And I learned just a little bit about how the Department of Justice could be perverted, how if you were on the wrong side of the street, you might get prosecuted, from the right side, you wouldn't. And that's one of the reasons I ultimately started Judicial Watch in 1994 and later Freedom Watch, which I now run. But I never imagined that it would ever come to this degree of government tyranny. And even though I was disillusioned back when I worked for the Justice Department, I still felt that there was some integrity in government. Today I feel there's none.
I agree with you. I mean, I think we're at a really important time in history here, and I think that the work that you're doing is incredibly important. Now, just to shift gears for a moment, there were some people in the comments and who, after our last interview, gave me a hard time for not asking you more about your position on Zionism. You had stated that you're a Zionist. Now,
Yeah.
I don't know all that much about what that statement actually means, but it has very recently on the internet and in the world of, you know, kind of alternate media, it's taken on a negative connotation, or I should say it's being driven towards a negative connotation by people who I feel are pseudo-intellectuals, but also anti-Jewish. And instead of just saying, hey, we don't like Jewish people, they say we don't like Zionists. And if you're a Jewish person that they don't like, they just say you're a Zionist. In my understanding, a Zionist is just someone who thinks that Israel has a right to exist.
Well, that's in large part, okay? You don't have to be Jewish to be a Zionist. In fact, many Christians are Zionists, okay? And there are very few Arabs, you probably count them on one hand, that are throughout the world, and Muslims. But it basically is a recognition that the state of Israel was given to the Jewish people, and by extension Christians, including Jesus, who was a rabbi, by God, and that this is our promised land. I mean, Moses wandered for 40 years to find the promised land in the Sinai. And Israel, and this is why evangelical Christians are bigger supporters by far of the state of Israel than leftist Jews, because to them that's important to the heritage of not just the Old Testament, but the New Testament and the coming of Jesus Christ. So being a Zionist just simply means that you believe that God gave you that land, and I believe that he did. And if anyone doesn't like it, too bad.
Yeah, I agree, too bad. I just want clarity of terms.
Actually, I'm wearing an American-Israeli flag today,
yeah,
in honor of the Vice President's trip to Israel, where, and the Vice President's a perfect example. He is more pro-Israel than most Jews.
Right. But that doesn't mean that you've got an allegiance that supersedes your allegiance to the United States.
No, it does not mean that at all. In fact, this is interesting, and we can look at it in the context of the Bundy family, is that Mormons believe that they're a tribe of Israel.
Huh.
Klayman's great-grandfather was named Levitt, who started the ranching. That's a Jewish name. He told me, he's taught me a lot about Mormonism in the last 2 years. It's easier to convert to being a Mormon if you're Jewish than even if you're Christian.
Huh.
Okay, you're considered one of the tribe. And they believe that the United States is the promised land, Israel number 2, okay? But it doesn't mean that you're against the United States. In fact, the future, our heritage is a Judeo-Christian heritage. We are so tied to the Holy Land that that's what causes someone like Vice President Pence to go over there and say, you are our closest ally, you are most dear to us. Because I firmly believe that the United States will cease to exist if Israel ceases to exist. That's how tied our heritage is. And people who don't want to let that into their heart, I mean, I've been to Israel 4 times. I'm a Christian. I was born Jewish. Okay, I'm Messianic. Okay, I believe in both. I believe that my grandfather came here and he wanted to be a rabbi. Instead, he went into the pork business. But he believed. I asked him. I said, I used to call him Pop-Up. I said, Pop-Up, do you believe that Jesus is the Son of God? Because all my friends were Christian except for a few, and I was trying to figure out why I was different.
You grew up in Philly?
In Philadelphia on the main line. And he said to me, grandson, God can do what he wants. If he wanted to make Jesus his son, he could do that. But my grandfather was very proud Jewish, as I am, okay, but he also believed that there was a possibility that Jesus was the Son of God. And over the course of time, I've had ups and downs in my life. And I believed intellectually that Jesus was the Son of God. And on a couple occasions, he actually came to me and spoke to me when I was going through some very difficult periods. And the last time that happened, I had almost killed myself on the 405 in Los Angeles.
By accident, you mean?
In a car accident. It wasn't my fault, but I was very lucky.
It wasn't like you were attempting suicide. You
No.
Almost got killed in an accident.
No, and I was going through a difficult time in my life. And I was going down, I had a concussion, Ventura Boulevard the next week. I had a rental car because I had totaled the car. And I start cursing to myself because I'm really upset about some things that happened in terms of my personal life and also a court case that I was handling, where I saw a dishonest judge make a decision that affected, and I was the counsel. And I was saying to myself, you know, Larry, you're a revolutionary. Jesus told the Romans to go F themselves. I'm actually thinking that in my head. And he told the Jewish high priest to do the same thing. Okay, he was competition. He had a product, you know, called God, the Father, that he was selling, and he was squeezing them out, you know, the money changers in the temple. That doesn't mean the Jewish people were that way, but these corrupt high priests. So I said, he told the Romans to go F themselves, he told the high priests. And at that moment, because I'm trying to justify myself, because I'm a revolutionary, I get this warm feeling that I got 10 years earlier in a Catholic church with my former wife and 2 young kids. And I hear him talking to me, not in words, but in thoughts, saying, and I get this tremendous warmth and adulation like I had 10 years earlier when he first said to me in a Catholic church at Christmas, Larry, I exist, you can accept me. That was also a difficult period in my life.
Wow.
And he said, you're working for me now, clear out your head. He said, you will pay a price, not like I did, but you will pay a price. But I want you to know I'm with you. And ever since then, my head was cleared. And I have a firm purpose, and whenever I get knocked off my rocker, okay, I feel his presence and I know that he's with me whatever happens. So yes, I'm a Christian, but I'm also a Jew, and I'm very proud of that. And I wish more people had that experience. I think if you let God into your heart, he will come.
You know, and the other thing I wanted to say about all of this is, of course, we saw Brand Thornton outside the courthouse blowing the shofar, and he told me that he was a Messianic rabbi, which I was confused by, because he's Mormon as well, I think, but you're doing a good job of explaining.
No, we're the same people, okay? We're the same people. Yeah. And, you know, I often said Judaism is the statute, Christianity are the regulations. It flushes out with greater specificity what God meant with Judaism, okay? And if you read, I'm not here to proselytize or to convert, okay? I don't believe in that. I'm Jewish in that respect. I don't try to convert people.
Right.
But if you look at Isaiah in the Bible, it predicts the coming of Christ. And I remember one time sitting in church in a Persian synagogue in Beverly Hills with a rabbi friend of mine, and I didn't understand what they were saying. It was in Farsi. I kind of liked the rabbi because he was helping me on some of my Iranian cases. So I would go pay respect. And I remember reading the Old Testament. It said, Jesus is, the Messiah is coming soon. And I asked myself, how long do we have to wait?
How soon?
So I believe he already came.
Wow.
So, but it's not inconsistent with Judaism. And I wish Christians and Jews really understood that better, because over years, we've been divided to some extent. And, you have people like Governor Mike Huckabee and others who try to bring the two religions together, because we really are the same people.
And do you think that this decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel was a good decision, or
I think it was a great decision.
Why?
Long overdue. Because you can't let the Palestinians, and by the way, they're not really Palestinians, okay? They took that name. Jews and Arabs lived in Palestine, okay? But they like that name, so okay, they can have it. But we can't let the Palestinians and the Arabs believe something which will never happen. They've got to come down to earth right now and make peace. Is that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, and their capital is Mecca in Saudi Arabia. Yes, they claim that Muhammad descended to heaven on the Temple Mount in East Jerusalem. Now, the Israelis are willing, obviously, to allow them autonomy over that, but Jerusalem cannot be their capital, and I believe that the West Bank can never be part of Palestine. And this is an issue which I have passion about and I've studied, and I've been there, is that the overwhelming majority of Arabs in Jordan are Palestinians. It's run by a Bedouin king. Jordan can be their state. Let them go to Jordan. I'd buy them a Cadillac and get them a condominium and convince them to move to Jordan.
So let's bring it back to Las Vegas, and let's talk a bit about the October 1st shooting. Obviously, we've got Sheriff Lombardo, who took over after Gilbert.
Right.
There was a whole issue that comes up in the film, What Happened in Vegas, about how Lombardo was previously in charge of a technology. He basically was the guy who was responsible for bringing in this new radio system. And then his campaign, this was a $40 million overhaul of the police radio system. And then his campaign was financed to a pretty large extent, or I should say a major contribution was made to his campaign by Motorola, the radio company. So again, we're seeing all this sort of stuff happening. And then just earlier this week, Laura Loomer reported, and was confirmed by the police, they now have encrypted their radio communications with yet another upgrade. So I can't help but wonder if the Las Vegas Metro PD is not in this regular practice of staging these events, blaming them on something that needs to be fixed by money, and then that thing happens. Like now we've got these encrypted
Well,
radio
look, the people of Las Vegas, Nevada are great people. I would live here, and I think they're fantastic. I've spent the better part of 2 years here on this Bundy case, in addition to other cases. And the people at Ground Zero, the working people, are among the greatest in the United States. But at the top, like you were talking about earlier with these plants at the Justice Department, BLM, this is a mafia. It's a very corrupt city.
Yeah.
It's corrupt. The mafia calls the shots. And Sheriff Lombardo obviously pays attention to those who scratch his back, and this whole thing with Motorola, I understand that, not coincidentally, he favored Motorola at Leesball.
It seems to be the case for sure. So I'm really interested to see what's going to happen with this new complaint. Do you have I know lawyers don't like to answer these types of questions. You can't really ask a
Right.
doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer what the outcome is going to be. But what are your thoughts? What's going to happen in this case?
Well, this is a landmark case. It's not just important for the Bundys. It's important for ranchers throughout the West who've gone out of business hand over fist. There are very few left. In fact, you know that the Bundys went out to protest for an Oregon rancher that was being driven out and got indicted for that. An individual, Leroy Finicom, was shot in cold blood by an FBI agent. We later found out they covered it up. But it's a big issue. And the whole issue of the federal government owning public lands, particularly throughout the West, is an issue very dear to the heart of people here. People in the East don't appreciate it. You know, I was born in Philadelphia, and in the East, people don't own that much land, and they generally don't ranch. Even though my family was in the meatpacking business, most people don't appreciate what the land means.
Right.
You know, Klayman will point out that if you slaughtered all of his head of cattle, he would produce 400,000 hamburgers for people to eat. So it's important that we have ranchers, and I hope that ranchers throughout the country will join us, if not by intervening in this case, filing other lawsuits. I'm there to help them. I'm there to assist them. I know Klayman feels the same way. He's actually in Idaho these days talking to ranchers and others about how to keep the BLM off your back.
And people who are interested in finding out more about that, I presume, can go to the website freedomwatchusa.org and contact you through that.
This has become a real passion of mine. I really believe that our connection to the land is one of the bases of our future. And you asked me about Israel, right? Our land, this land is our land, right? The song Exodus,
right,
from the movie Exodus with Paul Newman. You know, this is our land. It does not belong to faceless federal government political hacks that want to use it for their own purposes. It's our land, and Klayman loves that land, and he would never desecrate that land. That's his family's heritage, and under his own religious beliefs, that is his promised land.
Has anything happened to Dan Love or any other federal agents that were involved in this case since Judge Navarro dismissed it with prejudice?
Not that I know of. They, of course, Dan Love, I believe, was forced to resign, but you know, you can never get rid of a federal government employee. It's like herpes and true love. You know, what's the difference between true love and herpes? Herpes lasts forever, while a government official can never be fired. You just send them to Siberia.
What do you mean they can never be fired?
Well, by the time you do it, it costs the taxpayer so much money. So what happens is, look at this guy, Peter Strzok.
Yeah.
He should have been fired from the FBI. He's now working in the personnel office of the FBI. It's an absolute disgrace. It wastes taxpayers' money, and these federal government people think they're above the law, that they'll never be held accountable. They should all lose their pension. McCabe should lose his pension. Lisa Page, who was Strzok's girlfriend, should lose their pensions. They should all be fired. And frankly, the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, he should be fired too. He's a disgrace.
And what do you think about the OIG Horowitz? Is he a promising figure in terms of?
So far, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm willing to give people the benefit of the doubt, but I do know this, is that I filed ethics complaints early on for the Justice Department's failure to investigate the gross prosecutorial misconduct of acting attorney, U.S. Attorney Stephen Myray, and his political hack prosecutors, Dan Shees, and a woman named Ahmed.
Right.
And I always forget her name, it's a Muslim name. But they did nothing. And they wouldn't even acknowledge that they got our complaint. So then I went to federal court to ask a federal judge to order the investigation, which he was Obama appointee, which he didn't do, but I also asked him to contact the Justice Department because he was a federal judge who just learned of crimes being committed by Justice Department lawyers. He may have done that. He seemed like he was troubled by the whole thing, Judge Rudolph Contreras. And so my experience with Horowitz is not so good. But let's see what he does with regard to this FBI investigation and other investigations. And apparently he claims to have found the so-called missing Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, text messages.
I just heard that today, that they seized the cell phones and were able to recover the messages from the phones themselves.
Let's hope that he's come to life and that he will be an independent inspector general. But inspector generals, I mean, it's good that we have them, but they're not totally independent. They know who butters their bread in the end. It's the superiors at the Justice Department.
Yeah, interesting.
And that's why you need me as special counsel.
Right.
Okay, so go to freedomwatchusa.org, sign our petition, and donate to our cause if you can. But I'll tell you something, I will do a no-hold-barred investigation, and I can assure you, based upon what I know of Hillary Clinton and Robert Mueller, they're likely to be indicted and tried if I'm special counsel.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because in our last conversation you reiterated your concern that nothing would happen to the Clintons with regard to the legal
Well,
system.
if I'm special counsel, it will.
I'm going to definitely sign that petition.
Okay.
I want people to make sure
It will.
that they
Look, I've been.
sign the petition.
I'm kind of like the rerun of the movie The Fugitive. Okay, I'm the Lieutenant Gerard chasing Hillary Clinton now for decades. Okay, when we finally have her in our sights, let's legally put her away.
I agree with that, and I still want to.
The Wicked Witch of the Left.
That's right. I still really want to put you in touch with Charles Ortel, because I think that you two guys coming together, it's going to be like King Kong meets Godzilla, and then you could like blast Hillary Clinton with some laser beam eyes or something like that.
King Kong joins Godzilla.
Yeah, right, right.
But yeah, I mean, you need that right. I wouldn't ordinarily say that, you know, I would indict somebody before I investigated them, but I've been investigating Miss Hillary for a long time. There's more than enough there. And in fact, I had a citizens grand jury, and still have it in Ocala, Florida, where we did indict Hillary Clinton for breaching national security with regard to a variety of different matters. We tried her, but we didn't have the teeth to arrest her and put her in prison. If I was special counsel, we would have the U.S. Marshal Service backing me up. So if you give me the authority, I can assure you I'll get the job done.
There are many topics swirling in my head, Larry, but I think I might save them for a future conversation. We've covered quite a bit today. Was there anything else that you wanted to discuss before we say goodnight to everyone?
Well, I think what I want to discuss, Jason, we can do more of this later, is that we need better judges. And we need to choose them in a non-political way, whether you're conservative or liberal. And I'm very happy that a lot of conservative judges are being appointed, but I hope that those judges will adhere to the rule of law and to the Constitution, because certainly their leftist colleagues have not. And the other problem is that when a judge commits an ethical violation, and I've seen this in my 40-year career, where do you go to complain and to get disciplinary action? He goes to a judicial council run by other judges who have lunch in the same lunchroom as those judges, and they circle the wagons and protect themselves. And I can't tell you how many times I have come across unethical judges who have gone free and continue to violate the Constitution and general rules of ethics in my career. So we need to focus on those judges. So go to freedomwatchusa.org. We have a Freedom Selection Strike Force, and sign up for that too, because we need the support of the American people for that.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, I mean, and what you're talking about with the judges and everything, I can't help thinking about this matter of the problems that have occurred with the Las Vegas Metro Police, and that's just it, the disciplinary, I mean, it goes back to, I'm forgetting the Latin phrase, but who watches the watchers? I think in part we're watching the watchers now, because, you know, we heard repeatedly that local news is so under control of the large casinos because they're the advertisers for the news channels. And in many ways, the Metro PD is under the control of the casinos, and they want to cover up any wrongdoing so that they can dispel any notion that Las Vegas is anything other than a fantastic resort town for you.
You're right. Let me say one last thing.
Sure.
Again, this is in my book, Whores, Why and How I Came to Fight the Establishment, right in the beginning. Passage from the Old Testament, Isaiah, that we mentioned before. And God says to the people of Israel, I will restore the tarnished city to the faithful city. This is where Reagan got the phrase, shining city on a hill. Took it from the Old Testament, Isaiah. And he says, I will do that through our counselors, legal counselors, and our judges. And that's why they're so important, because they protect us from the tyranny of the other branches of government. And right now, frankly, most of them, particularly in the federal system, are political hacks. and they're not protecting us. In fact, they're actually covering up the corruption.
Yeah, I think corruption may be the biggest problem we face as a nation right now, and hopefully the work that you're doing can help end it.
Well, I mean, everybody does their part, and I'm not saying that I'm the be-all and end-all, but there really is, Jason, nobody else like me out there. There really isn't, because I feel so strongly about what I do, backed up by my religious beliefs, that I will risk all for what I believe is right. And if the time comes that I'm no longer here, that's God's choice. But I will go the distance for what I believe in. And that's what I love about Klayman Bundy and his family. They will too.
Well, Larry, thank you so much for everything that you're doing, and thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
I look forward to our next conversation, and I want to thank everybody for watching. Make sure you go to freedomwatchusa.org, and you can read more about the petition, sign the petition. You can support Larry and his efforts. And I also want to remind everyone that Crowdsource the Truth is a community-sponsored news source.
Great source.
Thank you very much. And I think it's important that we remain free of the influence of large advertisers or corporations. So if you enjoy the reporting, if you enjoy the interviews, consider going to patreon.com, Crowdsource the Truth, and becoming a monthly sponsor. I want to thank everybody. I'll see you tomorrow.